On today's episode, we talk about seduction. Just kidding. We're going to talk about purchasing houses overseas, the Department of Justice, the lawsuits, even rebranding a major real estate brand here in the U.S. Let's get started. You talk about it privately. We talk about it publicly. This is the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. Welcome again to the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. I'm your host, James Twiggins, along with my co-host, Keith Robinson, a.k.a. Crazy Uncle Keith.
What's
Keith,
up?
tell us about what is coming up on this episode.
Today we've got Brian Boero, who's with 1000 Watt Consulting. They do some really, really cool things in residential real estate. Yeah, I'm going to ask him about the importance of brand, some of that conflict between the industry and the agent and who's at the forefront of it. I'm sure he'll have an opinion on the Department of Justice stuff because everybody does. So yeah, brilliant mind. Can't wait to pick his brain. And
so he just did rebrand for Berkshire Hathaway, their company did, as well as Brian also used to run Inman News for Brad Inman. So lots of juicy content. All right, Brian, welcome to the show. We are excited to have you here with us today. I figured we would start with just telling the listeners and viewers just a real quick thing on your background. And then I want to dive deep into like some of the things you're working on or exciting projects that you've done recently. So I'll let you take it from there and then we'll follow up with a bunch of other questions. So
sounds great to me. Thank you for having me, guys.
Of course. So let's just start with...
Well, I have a question about his background first before we dive in.
All right,
Have you ever gotten in a fist fight over a brand? No?
No.
Close? What about close? Raised voices?
No. I'm a lover, not a fighter, Keith.
Okay. Good. That's probably why you're good at what you do. Okay. But tell us just a quick. We'll give the rundown.
You want me to? I'll give you the quick story.
Yes.
So, I've been around real estate and marketing and media and tech for 25 years, and never sold real estate. Never been a broker. Started out at Inman, working for Brad, learned a lot, been running 1000 Watt for 15 years. We're a creative agency that works with all kinds of companies in the space.
And you've done some recent big projects too, correct me if I'm wrong. Berkshire Hathaway, you guys just recently worked on as well.
Yeah, we did. We did what you might call a brand refresh for Berkshire Hathaway Home Services globally, which, you call it a refresh, but it was a major endeavor because you're touching,
everything,
multiple countries, thousands and thousands of professionals, different franchisees. It was a thing.
Go into that just a little bit without specifics to them, but what goes into that? Because I don't think people understand what a brand really is versus like something you do on Fiverr.
Yeah.
Tell them a little about that process. Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, a brand is not a logo, first of all.
Right.
I think you guys know that, right?
But not everybody does.
Not everybody does. The logo is not even what we would call the brand identity, right? The logo is like a component a part of it. It's like the capstone on a structure. It includes all kinds of stuff: texture, grids, pattern, color, type, all of that type of stuff. And, ideally, the brand is reflected in the visual identity, right? The visual identity and the logo up there at the top sort of reflect out the essence of the brand or some characteristics of what makes a certain company out into the world. So for Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, people tend to focus on the logo on these things. And sure, we changed the logo significantly, but that was not the lion's share of the work, right? So in this case, you had to think about, well, how does a yard sign look, or an A-frame look, or an open house flyer look in Lisbon, Portugal, and Los Angeles, right? And then you have to make sure that it works for hundreds of franchisees and tens of thousands of agents. And, that's where the real work happens.
How long does something like that take? Just curious. What was the time frame?
Oh, that took several months. Probably, it may have even taken 6 months because, you're getting into stuff like, you're testing colors, right? Getting swatches and all that type of stuff. I mean, some of this, but, the way something looks on the screen as a color is not how it looks out there in the world, again, on signage or environmentally with inside of an office, physically, right?
Sure.
So, it's 100 little details that, go into like stitching that full suit of clothes that is the identity.
And did you do a lot of consumer feedback on things along the way? How did that involve in the process as well? Just curious.
In this case, Berkshire Hathaway Home Services has an agency of record, right?
Got it.
An ad agency that does their TV and all of that stuff. They don't do identity, what we do. So they had done a ton of research, right? So we dropped it on that. Where we focused our research efforts was in talking to agents and franchisees all over the country, right? So we want to talk with the guy in Dubai who owns the Berkshire Hathaway franchise and say, okay, what do you need?
Right.
And want this, right? And we talk to, people in our own backyard the same way, right? And, as you know, there's shall we say, a diversity of opinion on these sorts of things.
You mean real estate? Weird.
Somebody write this down. That's the understatement of the podcast so far.
You kind of have to thread the needle on these things, and that's where you.
Let me help you Let me help you unthread that needle. Let's just talk about the needle that we're trying to thread. How do you balance that independent contractor nature-ness, that's not a phrase, of residential real estate with brand at the same time? How do you marry those two things? You've got an agent who often says, I'm the brand, and then you've got a brand who says, I'm the brand, and the agent is the one with the relationship with the human being, but they are intertwined. And how do those, in your mind, that push-pull mechanism of the right mix?
Just a good question.
Speak on that a little bit for us.
Well, you address it and deal with it through seduction.
Oh, I like that. You've got my
my
attention, sir.
Yeah. This is a business as far as the agent broker dynamic goes of carrots, not sticks, right? So if you want agents to co-brand with you or to place their brand beneath your brand, you have to make them want it. You have to draw them to that conclusion. You can't, sure, you can try and mandate it, but that's not going to go great in most cases, right? So you have to create something that agents want to be a part of. I think Compass has done this really well. If you create something that makes agents feel good and look good, then they will be drawn to it. If you have something that looks like garbage, they will fight you tooth and nail because they don't want anything to do with it.
Right. That's why you see a lot of that out there. Wasn't it back in the Hobbs Herder days where that's a lot of that started, if I remember correctly? Did I go really far back right now?
You did really
I went really far back.
Yeah,
I think I'm the old guy here, and you went back.
That was...
I call that like, it's like prehistoric branding. And,
From it's Paleozoic age or whatever that's called. That one, that kind?
Yeah, look, that's... we could talk for an hour on that, but that's, for those of you who aren't 100 years old, that was the days in the 80s and into the 90s of like, hey, I'm the agent who plays tennis, right? So I'm going to do a big ass brochure of me in my tennis outfit with a racket, or I'm the guy who wears the crazy hats, right? And, you're creating, I suppose, recognition and awareness, but you're not building a brand.
Right.
Oh, that's
a fair
an
point.
excellent distinction. That is
That's an important distinction.
Yeah. Being memorable doesn't mean you're a brand, right?
Yeah.
That's an excellent distinction.
You can be widely recognized for being a jackass, right?
Why do I feel attacked right now? I feel like
he was referring to you. So
okay.
No, not at all, Keith. It was not.
I know.
He's
We
like,
just
no, I
like
was
to
actually
keep it
talking about
spicy.
James.
Hey,
actually,
you started with seduction, so you headed us down the trail of weird. So
I want to ask you a question. I think it's kind of an interesting piggyback on it. So you talked about working overseas and just how do you develop this brand to work globally, as you put it. So, I know you recently got to purchase a place in Italy. Congrats. We're all jealous. Keith and I were both asking if we can use it, by the way. We can talk about that after.
Can you leave the key under the mat? Will you leave the key under the mat?
But relevant to a lot of the things happening and we'll get to this, I think it's important for us to talk about like the industry and where you think it's going to end up. But what was the experience like to buy in Italy versus here in the United States? Better, worse, different, pros, cons? Like what was your overall take in general? Like what do realtors do there versus here?
They do lots of the same things, and I think importantly, given recent developments, commissions aren't tied together, right? And it worked perfectly fine. We did some homework in advance, and we found an agent. We talked to agents over Zoom, and we found one we liked. We said, okay, how do you get paid? And she said, well, you pay me 3% of the purchase price. And we said, okay, that sounds great. And,
Man, I guarantee you everyone listening wishes their listing presentations went that way. Just for the record. No, I'm just teasing. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we put her through the ringer, but
I'm sure.
It was like, okay. And, we flew over there. We spent a week and a half looking at places, and we found a place that we liked. She wrote an offer. She was invaluable to the process, and I was more than happy to pay her 3%. And she articulated what she did in advance, and then she delivered on it. So, in that sense, if you look at that as a potential future for the U.S. market, it's not really all that scary. It's just different. And, there is no MLS, of course, which didn't really pose that big of a problem. I mean, the properties are on the damn internet, right? It's not like they're hiding under a rug. You can find the properties, but you don't have a lockbox. It was real hard in terms of the agent, right? And the legwork she had to do to not have that platform to collaborate. That was the big difference. And then no DocuSign. Everything was paper, which was insane.
So would you say that it was harder it was a harder process for the buyer's agent because there wasn't more of a standardized process like we have in the United States from that perspective? So there was more work that she was having to do to
You mean for information access as it's sold?
Just to get access to, I mean, we must have looked at 20 apartments over a week and a half, and she had to phone down every agent. They don't use email, it's all phone. And back and forth and back and forth. And I mean, the agent would have to meet us there. And it's ridiculous. There's no lockbox and there's no MLS. There's no, set of rules that govern how agents work together to do transactions. So, that's a big missing piece. But the compensation piece was left hand, right hand. I don't even know what the listing agent paid. I gather roughly the same as we paid, but it was like totally divorced.
And so how would that apply in the United States in your take, in the sense of, having buyers to have enough money to be able to do that here? I mean, let's go down this road since we're talking about it. So what does that look like if, obviously a lot of these lawsuits, they stem from the simple idea that they want compensation separated. They want buyers, agents to be paid by the buyer and sellers, agents to be paid by the seller.
Yeah.
So in the US with, where you're financing and you've got buyers scrambling to put everything down, do you see that model working here in the future? Or do you think there's going to be a lot of strain on buyer side representation and commission? I'll put it both ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think the great benefit of the way it works now from a buyer's perspective is it doesn't feel like they're spending any money.
Right.
And you could argue about this ad nauseum, but at the end of the day, the only money in the deal is produced by the buyer and or their lender, right?
Right.
So
it's eventually, if you go down far enough, it's the buyer's money that's paying everybody.
Yeah, totally, right? So but yet it doesn't feel the buyers like, it's like you're in the casino and you're playing with chips. It doesn't feel like money. So yeah, that's going to be a hurdle if you have to stroke a check, to an agent, to put them on retainer or pay them by the hour, unless they change the rules around that, which maybe they will, maybe they won't. So yeah, I mean, there's an affordability dimension. I think the presumption behind a lot of this thinking animating these lawsuits and possible regulatory actions is that, look, this is going to have the effect of degreasing commissions across the board, right? And if that happens, well, it'll be kind of it'll be a wash, right? I mean, you won't be able to finance them. There'll be some money paid up front, but you're not going to be paying 2.5% to 3% of the purchase price if you're a buyer.
That's the theory. Yeah.
That's the theory. I'm not sure that's a sound
I don't agree with that logic personally. It's just my opinion, but yeah.
I know. I mean, look, if you look around the world, buyers' representation is actually not common, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
And if I were to take this, if you say, okay, let's take a really weird case, Australia, where you're going to sell a house, a bunch of buyers are going to be on the lawn and do it as an auction.
Sure.
last time I mean, you tell me, have you read about some sort of bankruptcy crisis in Australia because homeowners or home buyers bought crappy houses? I don't know. It seems to work. So, I tend to think of this in sort of a stoic way, right? What's going to happen is going to happen. Many will be able to adjust, some won't, and those that don't will exit. And we need people to exit anyway.
Yeah, well, there's
you mean
no argument
people
on
being industry folks, not. I mean,
there's too many realtors.
Yeah, I just think, and we don't have to belabor this too much, but I believe we have an affordability issue, and down payment is a big piece of that affordability issue, and
it's a huge piece of
this will exacerbate that if it goes the way some people think it will go. How do you balance all of that in what's best for the people who they just want their house, right? That's their experience that they're having, and we can't use that so that they overpay, but we shouldn't, in trying to fix that they overpay, break the ability for them to go do it, right? And that's the teeter-totter that currently or that over the coming years will be going up and down, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm a dramatic oversimplifier, but couldn't we just have North Carolina today, as it requires buyer broker agreement signed, right? And I think it's less about who pays and more about knowing how much everyone's getting paid. So if we just said nationally, everybody's got to sign a buyer broker agreement now. I know I'm waving my magic wand of silliness, but allow me for just a moment. Wouldn't that meet a lot of the requirements for which are cited in this suit? It would be fully disclosed and everyone would know.
Technically, right? But I think there is a larger sort of ideological or normative, shall we say, belief behind a lot of this legal and regulatory energy right now. And that is that, sure, even if you make it transparent, commissions are too damn high. If you read that memo from the judge when they certified Merrill as a class, they use the legal term in antitrust stuff about the but-for world, right? And but for this noxious conspiracy between the NAR and these big franchisees and brokers, their expert witness said, well, buy-side commissions would probably be about 1.5%, right? So I'm not sure transparency and openness kind of neutralizes it. NAR changing the rules in terms of allowing brokers to show buy-side compensation certainly didn't call off the dogs. So
sure.
No.
I think there's a larger, vision of what things should be behind all of this.
Well, let me ask you this, because I know this is a good segue to, you've done some recent consumer surveys.
Yeah, those have been awesome, by the way.
And those have been awesome.
Great.
Thank you for sharing one of those for me to see some of that data that I got to see at the conference we were at. Talk to us about that a little bit, because I think this is a good piece. Like there's one side that thinks that all this stuff should change, and then you've done surveys asking consumers these very questions about their experience with their agent and what are they willing to do, what are they willing to pay. Like, can you go deep on some of the really interesting insights that you found from doing some of those studies?
Yeah, I mean, the net of it is this: when we ask people if on the buy side, so we did, for example, a survey of people who have bought in the last 3 years, and we asked them, hey, did you know how your buyer's agent got paid? And about a third said, yeah, absolutely. And another chunk said, kinda. And 11% said, I had no idea, right? No idea. And then we said, well, okay, did you feel like you paid for your agent services, or you feel like the listing agent paid, or the seller paid for your agent services? 50-50 split. Nobody knew what was going on. So this is like a huge self-own within this industry by shying away from that conversation and just, unless it comes up, we don't deal with it. Culturally, Keith, you mentioned North Carolina, it's required. Some places, buyer brokerage is very common. Other places, it's like, we don't talk about that.
We don't talk about those
things. It varies, but to create that vacuum of ignorance is just, I think it's dumb. But when we actually ask people, and we've done this with recent sellers and recent buyers, hey, your agent was paid this. and we actually break that down into specific scenarios where we say, your agent spent 40 hours and, the gross commission was $12,500. That comes out to like X $100 an hour. How does that sit with you? Mm-hmm. The large majority are like, yeah, that sounds fine. It's about right. Very few say that's outrageous and a ripoff. Mm-hmm. So I think...
do you think that's because what do you think the reason is? Because do you have to have dual income to do anything anymore in the U.S.? Like everyone's busy. It's the single largest transaction most people are ever going to do their life. Like what is the reasoning or logic that you found from...
That people didn't know, or that they were okay
I
with
think
cost?
it's
the okay part.
Part of it is ignorance, right? I mean, as I was just saying, sometimes people don't even think to ask, don't care to know. The other part of it is, I think, the fee relative to the scale of the transaction, right? So if you're buying a $1 million home, okay, and you're going to pay $25,000 on the buy side, and you kind of sort of think that the seller was paying that anyway, and it's just funny money that's all settled up at escrow. I just don't think people feel it. I don't think they think about it or feel it, and I think that has a lot to do with it. As much as we want to think that people are rational, no,
they are not.
Calculators of
We've
things,
learned anything. Yeah, lately,
right?
People are not.
Yeah, you're not. And, I think that explains quite a lot of it.
I agree with everything you've said. I guess I'll add a point that I also think that the intimacy and the connectedness of the relationship between, you spoke quite adoringly about your agent in Italy and the work that she did and how she serviced you and the way that she took this really complicated process, added the mystery of a foreign country to it, and still managed to exceed your expectations, and you were happy to pay it, right? Yeah. And I do think that is a component of the why people are okay with it, right? Is
absolutely
the shepherding and it's human beings. We spent way more time around a campfire than we have around a Zoom screen or on a podcast, right? And we're very used to leaning on another human for big decisions. We don't do those in a vacuum. We seek counsel. And so I think that's a piece of it too, right? All the things you've said, they don't think about it as much. And then when they do, like when you broke it down for them and said, okay, your agent made XYZ per hour, they were like, yeah, that sounds great, because they were happy with the service that they received.
Yeah, because, my lawyer makes at least that.
Right.
Yeah.
I hate my lawyer.
I hate that guy.
I hate that guy. I don't even like him, but I love my agent. To your point, Keith, I think we're kind of saying the same thing.
We are.
Right?
We are. Yeah.
I mean, there is, I think that there is something at the end of a real estate transaction that if it goes well, and look, the NAR surveys tell us most people love their agent. There's an afterglow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You have this moment of intimacy, and then there's the afterglow where
we're back to seduction, Brian. I like this.
Yeah. But I think it's real, right?
It's legitimate, 100%.
You helped me do this thing that was like so intense emotionally.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm forever indebted. And if you made $25,000 for selling my house or helping me buy the house, awesome.
Yeah. It's also an emotional thing because of the fact it's a home.
Yes.
It's not, when you're dealing with your lawyer, and I get it. We have a lot of them and work with them. It's like, I'm dealing with you on something I don't want to be doing, and I'm having to pay you for it, versus a house. You're like, I really want this. I want to raise a family. It's important to me, and it's the only one I want. And thank God you got it for me. And it's funny because the numbers, and you know the surveys as well as I do, like the use of a realtor continues to be an all-time high. It dropped a slight tiny amount, mostly due to institutional buyers and everything else. But for the most part, it's been right around 87 to 89%. Even with all the advent of all of this tech to disintermediate, it's still people choose a real estate agent. So it's interesting to look at those correlations. So let's transition to a couple other things here before we have to wrap up the show. I got like two questions, and we'll end on this one. But I want to go back to this branding, and this is where you guys really, strategy and branding are like, you guys do it so incredibly well. So if you were launching a real estate brand tomorrow, like you and Mark and the whole crew were like, screw it. We're no longer going to offer our services. We're just going to get into this thing and do a brokerage. Like, how would you approach it? What does it look like to you? Is it virtual? Is it brick and mortar? Is it like, I saw this thing, you worked with a company that did like a coffee shop thing. Like, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'd buy a Next Home franchise.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate that plug for sure.
So,
$20. Somebody Venmo.
That's a really complicated question. I guess forget the economics of it, because having an office and having a really nice office and being boutique-y, it's not like that can't be profitable in certain markets, right? You don't have to be virtual. Like I would say the number one requirement that would be important to me would be command and control over my people, because the people are the most important implements of the brand. Okay. And then also that the brand have a point of view. How should real estate be done and why? Right. And those would be most important to me. And on the first one, command and control, that's the beauty of teams. Teams are little, units of command and control nested within a brokerage with no command and control in many cases, right? So, and having a point of view is important.
I love that. The point of view. I mean,
the money part.
Both points. Yeah, but the point of view part is so important. And too often, I think the industry tries to be all things to all people.
I agree.
Totally.
And your point of, that's when they are the most happy, right? Is when they find an agent and a brand that resonates with how they feel it should be done, or I guess in this example, how it should be done to them, right? Or that experience of buying and selling.
Yeah. I mean, look, whatever you, however viable or not viable you think Redfin is, or whether you can't stand Redfin, doesn't matter.
They have a point of view.
I've always admired that company and Glenn for having a point of view.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the rubber meets the road when you have to perform on your point of view, right? Like airlines, I forget which one is the friendly skies, but I know they aren't friendly, right?
No, they never were. United was
Yeah. And so you have a miss between the slogan and the experience, and that's no wonder they're in and out of bankruptcy, right? But if you can align your point of view with the truth and how you act and what you do, I think that's where the beautiful music happens.
Yeah.
I think you were, I'm sure you were in the room when Glenn was talking about some issues that were important to him, and he took a stand on those issues. And I remember I honestly panned the room, because I'm always like, it's going to be interesting to see how the room reacts. But it was funny. But what's interesting was I think certainly there were lots of people that wouldn't agree with Glenn's point of view, but honestly, everybody admired the fact that he said it. Like I felt like the room was like, you could tell that some people were like, nah. And then, but they were like, but I respect the fact that you took a position and you're willing to say that. So, maybe I think that's a great comment, and certainly something I think our industry could do a better job of across the board. So take us home with this. Because you've been doing this a really long time, and I always love listening to you talk on stage about sort of the future. And
James, I'm super old.
You are.
Really,
literally.
It's better than the. I mean, I guess the alternative,
like a long time.
It depends if the alternative is death or retirement.
Forever.
Right? Yeah, forever. Dog years.
Give us this 5 years, the next 5 years, and just tell us what you see. I mean, like you said, you used to run Inman with Brad. Like, you've seen it all. So like you have a very unique perspective that I always admire. So where do you think things are going to be in 5 years? And give us the holistic. Like, is it going to be a CoStar takeover at Zillow? Like, just kind of go where do you think the interesting things will be in the next 60 months?
I always answer these type of questions by saying that we should never underestimate the power of the way things are in this business, right? There is such an inertia, and it's because it's very diffuse, and it's fragmented, right? What makes this industry screwed up, the fragmentation, is also what protects it.
It makes it defensible, right?
What keeps it from changing. So you talk to me about the metaverse, blah, blah, I'm like, whatever. But I don't know. I think that we've reached a real problem with the volatility over the last 3 years in the market, with the realtor population. And I think that the scarcity that we are experiencing right now in terms of homes to sell and the severe drop in volume, I think we're going to have a real realtor crash that is probably going to be more lasting than the one coming out of the great financial crisis. I do think that is going to happen because I just don't think that this industry is prepared to feed this many mouths. And, I think the consumer, was dragged into a very exhilarating 2 years. And so were hundreds of thousands of people who joined the real estate industry. And I think they're going to be washed out really quick. And, I hope that over time, that, among other things, possibly a change to the way commissions are done, right, results in a leaner, meaner, more professionalized real estate industry. Or I could just be thinking wishfully, right?
Yeah. Or
so there's a little bit of I hope this happens in there, but I think it will happen. The defining characteristic of the industry for the next few years, I think, will be scarcity.
Sure. And I think everybody's sort of feeling that. Certainly, as everyone you talked in the industry is seeing adjustments happening around the board. Companies got to get back to basics and a little bit more lean and mean than they were. Or they need to get lean and mean and be a little bit smarter about expenses. So
I'll add one point to it. I think, to your point, maybe this is what you're saying. I'm just putting less eloquent words to it, but I think it's going to be a terrible time to be average in this industry. And I think it can be a really good opportunity for those who can be excellent, and that they will thrive and capture market share, and they won't have that sense of that feeling of lack that because you're right, I think, in a lot of the things that you're saying, and the ones who are going to get washed out are the below average or the average and below, right? And that's going to leave more opportunity for market share for the great. So it's level up time, right? If you're going to try to grow this business and be in this business, it's time to level up.
Yeah, for sure. Brian, thanks so much for being on the show with us. We so appreciate your insights. Lots of good content. And we'll be for sure hitting you up on that house in Italy to use.
Key under the mat. Leave the key under the mat.
I'm going to require a big security deposit for you guys.
Yeah, especially me. I get it.
Can we finance that? Just curious. Unlike versus up front. So thanks for being here again, Brian.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Listen, we care about you deeply, which is why we never want you to miss an episode of this podcast. Subscribe now. It's just a push of a button.